In this video, I'm going to quickly discuss with you impulse control, what it is in the context of actually using it to modify behaviour and to improve obedience performance, and also what it is not. Now, impulse control has become a bit of a buzzword over the past few years, probably the last 5-6 years in the dog training world. And even though I see people use that term over and over and over, most of them don't seem to share what impulse control really is in the context of modifying behaviour in dogs and improving obedience performance. Now, I'm going to grossly simplify this to make it as easy for as many people as possible to understand. But in essence, we can look at the way that the term is most often used in the dog training world, and that is referring to deferred gratification or delayed gratification. An example of this would be where my dog is in a heel and is focused on me, and I'm bouncing a ball with my left hand while the dog maintains the behaviour and the focus on me over here without paying attention to the ball. Now, the idea of this description, impulse control, is that the dog chooses to focus on doing this behaviour even though it wants to get this ball. And in fact, in this example, let's assume that this ball is the end goal of this healing behaviour. And that's often the case with my own dogs and dogs that I work with. However, impulse control is about more than simply delaying gratification or deferring gratification. Impulse control also primarily, at the end of the day, involves, in a useful context that's applicable to working with dogs that have problems with this, it involves the development of inhibitory pathways and mechanisms in the dog's brain. So, at the end of the day, it's nice that the dog can defer gratification. However, what that often means is that the dog needs to have a strong level of optimism and expectation that this behaviour is going to pay in a profound way. Simply doing this work, even where you vary the impulses that the dog defers away from, does not develop the entire suite of tools, such as the inhibitory pathways, that teaches the dog that it must not do these things. And so if you're looking at working with people, what people would call reactive dogs, or what are more often dogs displaying aggressive behaviour or threat displays or whatever, most often when done well, behaviour modification involves teaching these dogs that certain behaviours are non-negotiable, and ideally teaching the dog that the behaviours you desire it to engage in are a great way to cope with that. So at some point, the work needs to progress to the point where the dog learns that to engage with the problem impulse, to act on that problem impulse, produces an undesirable outcome. That should involve, ideally, the ability to remove something from the picture that the dog would find really enjoyable, such as getting that ball. But for many dogs who aren't wired that way and who are profoundly damaged, that is not always that negative punishment, that taking away of something grand that it really wants access to, isn't viable, because those dogs are difficult to motivate in the first instance. The more profoundly damaged the dog is, the less options we tend to have in terms of motivating performance. So at some point, this is where intelligently applied positive punishment and or negative reinforcement can become extremely useful aspects of a trainer's practice to have in their toolkit. And it should be said that in these profoundly damaged dogs, there are often contingencies which can come from applying those operant forces, which need to be, again, intelligently managed and worked with in order to avoid them. So the work that is done with the dog should be done in such a way that the problem solving for this, the avoiding of contingencies, is built into the work. So at the end of the day, let's summarise. Impulse control is partially made up of deferring gratification. But at the end of the day, impulse control is about building inhibitory pathways in the dog's brain. And so these other operant forces can become, and often do become, very important pieces of the overall training puzzle that needs to be solved when doing behavioural modification work and or trying to create really high-powered obedience performances. So there we go, and thing. And I did it in one take.